It's time to talk about your money here on Good Morning Quad Cities. First, let's all take a deep breath and take a look at how the stock market is doing. It was another grim week for investors. Last week, the S&P 500 fell 122 points. The Nasdaq lost 450 points, while the Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 934 points. For the S&P 500 and Nasdaq, it was their 7th consecutive weekly decline. For the Dow, it was its 8th consecutive weekly decline. And to make matters worse, the last time the Dow posted a weekly gain was back on March 25th. Joining us to help us is our financial expert, Mark Revachevsky. Mark, we've talked about this sell-off last week. It continued last week as well. What is happening?
One of these weeks, we will start the segment off with good news about the
promise?
I promise.
All right, you shook on it. You shook on it.
You're right, but it was another rough week in the market. But last week was really about the retail industry. A lot of big name retailers reported their latest quarterly earnings. Walmart, Target, Kohl's, and unfortunately, the results weren't very pretty. For example, Target's latest quarterly earnings were 52% lower than they were 12 months ago. And many retailers, including Amazon, which is the world's largest online retailer, they're starting to feel the strain of this high inflation, rising interest rates. Consumers are starting to become very price sensitive to these rising prices and operating expenses, whether it's labor costs, transportation costs, warehousing. And many retailers are starting to slash their earnings outlook for the rest of the year.
But this is where it gets a little confusing. Last week, the U.S. Census Bureau came out with this information, and they said that retail sales increased by almost 1% last month in April, and compared to last year, 8.2%. That seems a little confusing based on what we're just talking about.
Yeah, you're right. At face value, Angie, these April retail sales numbers, do look quite good. In April, retail sales increased by 0.9%, and as you just mentioned, are up by 8.2% over the last 12 months. But retail sales numbers, though, Angie, aren't adjusted for inflation. With the national inflation rate here at 8.3%, this means that consumer prices on average are now 8.3% higher than they were 12 months ago. And April's annual sales increase is simply due to higher consumer prices. Adjusted for inflation, Angie, consumers are not buying more goods and services than they were 12 months ago. They're actually buying less.
All right, this next graphic, a warning, it's going to hurt a little bit. This is how much pain many investors have endured since the start of the year. And so a lot of people want to know what they should do. And lately we've been hearing about this word called I-bonds. What is your viewpoint on this? Try to help us get through all the noise.
There is a lot of discussion on these I-bonds. Now, at least this kind of gives us viewers to find out a little bit more exactly what they are. But an I-bond is issued by the U.S. Treasury. So the principal and interest is fully guaranteed by the U.S. government. But I-bonds are unique in that they have a component that adjusts with inflation. And as inflation goes higher, which it has, you'll now receive a much higher interest payment. But there are a number of caveats to these I-bonds, Angie. And perhaps the biggest one is that it does lock up your money for quite some time. You're unable to redeem an I-bond for 1 year. And if you redeem it within the first 5 years, you are charged a penalty, which can significantly impact your overall rate of return. But that said, inflation, is expected to remain historically high for quite some time. But at some point, though, Angie, inflation will start to decline. And likewise, so will those interest payments you receive on those I-bonds.
Yeah, I'm glad that you answered that because we've had a lot of questions about I-bonds. And that brings us to a new part of our segment, your questions. We actually want to start hearing from you about what's concerning you right now. So if you have a question for Mark, all you have to do is email us, news@wqad.com. You ask the question, and Mark will hopefully answer it for us.
We're here just not to inform, but to educate.
Yeah.